I never thought I'd be the one to say, I caught my husband cheating. But there I was, standing in a cafe, watching the man I loved for 10 years kissing another woman. In that moment, my world shattered. How did I get here? It started with a simple grocery trip that took too long. Then came the hushed phone calls, the lingering scent of unfamiliar perfume, and the gnawing feeling in my gut that something wasn't right. I became a detective in my own marriage, piecing together a puzzle I never wanted to solve. But as I uncovered each lie, each betrayal, I discovered something unexpected, a strength I never knew I had. This is my story of heartbreak, resilience, and rediscovery. How do you rebuild your life when the person you trusted most tears it apart? I never thought my life would take such a dramatic turn. Looking back, it all seemed so perfect. Michael and I had been married for 10 years, and I truly believed we were happy. We had our routines, our inside jokes, and our plans for the future. I was content teaching my 4th grade class, while Michael worked as an accountant. We weren't rich, but we had enough to live comfortably in our cozy suburban home. Every morning, I'd wake up early to prepare breakfast for both of us. Michael would stumble into the kitchen, his hair a mess, and I'd hand him his coffee just the way he liked it, black with 2 sugars. We'd chat about our plans for the day, and he'd kiss me goodbye before heading off to work. It was simple, but it felt right. I remember one particular morning when everything still seemed normal. I was grading papers at the kitchen table when Michael came in, looking a bit stressed. "Everything okay, honey?" I asked, noticing the furrow in his brow. He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "Yeah, just a big project at work. Don't worry about it." I got up and gave him a hug. "You've got this. You always do." He held me a little tighter than usual, and I felt a warmth spread through my chest. This was love, I thought. This was what marriage was all about, supporting each other through thick and thin. That evening, I decided to surprise Michael with his favorite dinner, lasagna. I spent hours in the kitchen, making sure everything was perfect. When he came home, his face lit up at the smell. "Sarah, you didn't have to do this," he said. But I could see the appreciation in his eyes. "I wanted to," I replied, feeling proud of myself. "You've been working so hard lately. You deserve it." We sat down to eat, and for a while, everything felt just like it always had. We talked about our days, laughed at silly jokes, and made plans for the weekend. Michael even suggested we could go to the farmer's market on Saturday morning, something we used to do often but had fallen out of habit. "And that sounds perfect," I said, reaching across the table to squeeze his hand. After dinner, we cuddled up on the couch to watch a movie. It was some romantic comedy that I'd been wanting to see, and Michael, despite his usual preference for action films, had agreed to watch it with me. As the main characters fell in love on screen, I snuggled closer to Michael, feeling grateful for what we had. "I love you," I whispered, looking up at him. He smiled down at me, his arm tightening around my shoulders. "I love you too, Sarah." In that moment, everything felt right in the world. I had a job I loved, a comfortable home, and a husband who I thought adored me as much as I adored him. If someone had told me then what was about to unfold, I would have laughed in their face. How could anything go wrong when everything was so perfect? But life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it? And sometimes, those surprises aren't the good kind. They're the kind that shake you to your core, that make you question everything you thought you knew. Little did I know, the cracks in our perfect life were already starting to form, hidden just beneath the surface. As I drifted off to sleep that night, nestled in Michael's arms, I had no idea that our world was about to be turned upside down. I couldn't have imagined the pain, the betrayal, and the strength I would discover within myself in the coming weeks. But that's the thing about life. It never quite turns out the way you expect it to, and sometimes that's not such a bad thing after all. I first noticed something was off on a Tuesday evening. Michael came home later than usual, which wasn't uncommon given his job, but there was something different about him. His shirt was slightly wrinkled, and he had this look on his face, a mix of guilt and excitement that I couldn't quite place. "Hey, honey," I said, giving him a quick kiss. "How was your day?" "Fine," he replied, a bit too quickly. "Just busy. Listen, I was thinking, why don't I start doing the grocery shopping?" I raised an eyebrow. In our 10 years of marriage, Michael had never once volunteered to do the groceries. He claimed he couldn't tell the difference between types of lettuce and always came back with the wrong brand of cereal. "You want to do the shopping?" I asked, unable to hide my surprise. "Are you feeling okay?" He laughed, but it sounded forced. "I'm fine, Sarah. I just thought it might help take some stress off you. You're always so busy with school and grading papers." It was true that I had been complaining about being overwhelmed lately, but this sudden offer felt odd. Still, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. Maybe he was just trying to be more helpful. "Okay," I said slowly. "If you're sure. The list is on the fridge." Michael nodded, grabbed the list, and headed out. I expected him to be back in an hour, tops, but 1 hour turned into 2, then 3. By the time he finally walked through the door, laden with grocery bags, I was worried sick. "Where have you been?" I asked, trying to keep the accusation out of my voice. "I was about to call the police." Sorry, he said, not meeting my eyes. The store was crowded, and then I hit traffic on the way back. I helped him unpack the groceries, noticing that he'd forgotten several items on the list. But what struck me more was the receipt. The total was much higher than our usual grocery bill. Yet there didn't seem to be that much more food. "Did you buy something special?" I asked, rifling through the bags. "Oh, just some snacks for work," he muttered, quickly grabbing a bag and shoving it in the pantry before I could see inside. Over the next few weeks, this became our new routine. Michael insisted on doing the shopping, always taking much longer than necessary and coming back with fewer groceries than we needed. Each time, he had a different excuse: traffic, long lines, running into an old friend. One evening, as I was planning lessons for my class, I heard Michael's phone buzz. He was in the shower, so I glanced at the screen, seeing a text from someone named Jim from work. The message preview read, "Great seeing you today. Same time next week." I felt a pang of unease. Michael had never mentioned a Jim from work before. And why would he be seeing a coworker outside of office hours? When Michael got out of the shower, I casually asked, "How's work going? Any new projects?" He tensed slightly. Same old, same old. Why do you ask?" "Just curious," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. I saw a text from Jim while you were in the shower. Is he new?" Michael's face went blank for a moment before he forced a smile. "Oh, Jim? Yeah, he's new. We're working on a project together." I nodded, pretending to believe him, but something in my gut told me there was more to the story. That night, as Michael slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. Was I being paranoid? Or was there really something going on? The next day, I decided to do a little investigating. While Michael was at work, I checked our joint bank account. The grocery expenses were higher than ever, but there were also several transactions at a cafe near the supermarket, a cafe I knew Michael had never mentioned. My heart sank. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but the evidence was starting to pile up. The long shopping trips, the secretive behavior, the mysterious texts, and now these unexplained expenses. That evening, when Michael came home, I watched him closely. He seemed distracted, checking his phone more often than usual. When I asked about his day, his answers were vague and evasive. As we sat down to dinner, the tension between us was palpable. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, but fear held me back. What if I was wrong? What if there was a perfectly innocent explanation for all of this? But as I looked at Michael across the table, at the man I thought I knew better than anyone in the world, I realized that something had changed. The trust that had been the foundation of our marriage was starting to crumble, and I didn't know how to stop it. I went to bed that night with a heavy heart, torn between my love for Michael and the growing suspicion that he was hiding something from me. Little did I know, This was just the beginning of a journey that would test me in ways I never imagined. As the days turned into weeks, my suspicions about Michael grew stronger. It wasn't just the grocery shopping anymore. His whole behavior had changed, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. One evening, I was grading papers in the living room when Michael's phone rang. He glanced at the screen, then quickly got up and walked to the kitchen. I could hear him speaking in hushed tones, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't talk right now," he said, "and I'll call you back later." When he returned, I tried to act casual. "Who was that?" I asked, not looking up from my papers. "Oh, just work stuff," he replied, waving his hand dismissively. "Nothing important." But I knew it was important. Why else would he need to take the call in private? The next day, I decided to do some digging. While Michael was in the shower, I checked his phone. I know it wasn't right, but I was desperate for answers. There were several calls and texts from a number I didn't recognize. The texts were vague, mostly about meeting times and places. My heart raced as I quickly put the phone back before Michael finished his shower. That weekend, Michael announced he was going grocery shopping again. As he left, I noticed he was wearing cologne, something he never did for a simple trip to the store. When he returned hours later, he had fewer bags than usual. "Did you forget some things?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. "Oh, they were out of stock on a few items," he mumbled, avoiding eye contact. I helped him unpack, noticing that he'd bought expensive cheese and wine, items that weren't on our usual shopping list. When I questioned him about it, he shrugged and said he thought we could use a treat. That night, as we sat on the couch watching TV, I could feel the distance between us. Michael was physically there, but his mind seemed a million miles away. He kept checking his phone, smiling at messages I couldn't see. "Everything okay?" I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "Yeah, why wouldn't it be?" he replied, a little too quickly. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but instead, I just nodded and turned back to the TV. The show we were watching was a blur, my mind racing with possibilities I didn't want to consider. The next week, things got even stranger. Michael started coming home later from work, always with a different excuse. One night it was traffic, another night it was a last-minute meeting. But his shirt always smelled faintly of perfume, a scent I knew wasn't mine. I tried to talk to my best friend Lisa about it. We met for coffee one afternoon after school. "I don't know, Lisa," I said, stirring my latte absently. "Am I going crazy? Am I just being paranoid?" Lisa reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Sarah, honey, you're not crazy. Something's definitely off. Have you tried talking to Michael about it?" I shook my head. "I'm scared," I admitted. What if he's... I couldn't bring myself to say the word cheating, but Lisa understood. She gave me a sympathetic look. "You need to confront him, Sarah. You can't go on like this." I knew she was right, but the thought of confronting Michael terrified me. What if my suspicions were correct? What would I do then? That night, I lay awake long after Michael had fallen asleep. I watched his peaceful face, remembering all the happy years we'd shared. How had we gotten to this point? Where had I gone wrong? The next morning, I made up my mind. I would talk to Michael, demand answers. But as I was about to bring it up over breakfast, he suddenly announced he had to leave early for a meeting. "I might be late tonight," he said, kissing me quickly on the cheek. Don't wait up." As the door closed behind him, I felt a surge of anger and determination. Enough was enough. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly wondering and worrying. I spent the day in a haze, unable to focus on my students or my lessons. When I got home, the house felt emptier than ever. I paced the living room, rehearsing what I would say to Michael when he got home. Hours passed, and still no Michael. I called his cell, but it went straight to voicemail. I called his office, but no one answered. The panic and anger inside me grew with each passing minute. Finally, at almost midnight, I heard his key in the lock. I stood up, my heart pounding, ready to confront him. But as soon as he walked in, I knew something was different. He looked guilty. "Sarah," he said, his voice heavy, "we need to talk." Those 4 words confirmed all my worst fears. As I stood there, facing the man I had loved and trusted for so long, I realized that nothing would ever be the same again. Our perfect life was about to shatter, and I had no idea if I was strong enough to pick up the pieces. I couldn't sleep that night after Michael's ominous, "We need to talk." He tried to explain, stumbling over his words about work stress and needing space, but I wasn't buying it. Something was definitely wrong, and I was determined to find out what. The next morning, I woke up early, my mind made up. I was going to investigate. No more sitting around waiting for answers. I needed to know the truth, even if it broke my heart. As soon as Michael left for work, I sprang into action. I started with his closet, feeling like a detective in one of those crime shows we used to watch together. I rifled through his pockets, checked his suit jackets, even looked in his shoes. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary until I reached the back of the closet. There, hidden behind his old college sweatshirts, was a small box. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside were receipts, dozens of them. But they weren't from the grocery store. They were from restaurants, cafes, and a jewelry store. My stomach churned as I saw a receipt for a beautiful necklace. It certainly wasn't a necklace I owned. "Oh, Michael," I whispered, fighting back tears. "What have you done?" I spent the next hour going through every receipt, piecing together a story I didn't want to believe. Lunch dates, dinners, gifts. All for someone who wasn't me. The dates coincided with his grocery trips and late nights at the office, but I needed more proof. I couldn't confront him with just receipts. What if there was an innocent explanation? Even though deep down, I knew there wasn't. I moved to his desk next, feeling guilty for invading his privacy, but too hurt and angry to stop. In the bottom drawer, hidden under a stack of old magazines, I found a burner phone. My hands trembled as I turned it on. There were dozens of text messages, all to and from the same number. I read through them, each word like a knife to my heart. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was amazing. I miss you already." I dropped the phone like it had burned me. It was true. All my worst fears were true. Michael, my Michael, was having an affair. I don't know how long I sat there on the floor of our bedroom, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. Minutes, hours, time seemed to stand still as my world crumbled around me. Eventually, I pulled myself together enough to put everything back where I'd found it. I couldn't let Michael know I'd discovered his secret. Not yet. I needed time to think, to plan my next move. I called in sick to work, something I never do. I just couldn't face my students. Couldn't pretend everything was normal when my life was falling apart. Instead, I spent the day alternating between crying and plotting. Should I confront him? Should I wait and gather more evidence? Should I hire a private investigator? The thoughts swirled in my head, making me dizzy. By the time Michael came home that evening, I had composed myself. I greeted him with a smile, pretending everything was fine. He looked relieved, probably thinking I'd forgotten about his "we need to talk" from the night before. "How was your day?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady. "Oh, you know, same old," he replied, not meeting my eyes. "How about you? Feeling better?" I nodded, the lie sticking in my throat. "Much better, thanks." We ate dinner in near silence, the weight of unspoken words hanging between us. Michael kept checking his phone, and each time he did, I imagined him texting her. How long had this been going on? How could I have been so blind? After dinner, Michael announced he had some work to finish and disappeared into his home office. As soon as the door closed behind him, I let out a shaky breath. I couldn't keep this up. I needed to know more. I waited until I heard the shower running, then slipped into his office. His laptop was still open, and I said a silent thank you when I realized he hadn't logged out. My fingers flew over the keyboard as I checked his emails, his calendar, his browser history, and there it was, in black and white. Emails to a woman named Rebecca, planning meetings and sharing inside jokes. Calendar entries for business lunches that I now knew were anything but business. Hotel reservations, restaurant bookings, even plans for a weekend getaway. I felt sick. How could he do this to me, to us? I thought we were happy. I thought we had a good life together. Was it all a lie? As I heard the shower turn off, I quickly closed everything and slipped out of the office. My mind was reeling with what I'd discovered. I needed a plan. I needed advice. I didn't know what I needed. That night, as Michael slept soundly beside me, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I would take the next step. I didn't know what that step would be yet, but I knew I couldn't go on like this. The woman who had woken up this morning was gone. In her place was someone new, someone stronger, angrier, and determined to uncover the whole truth, no matter how much it hurt. The next few days were a blur of anxiety and secret investigations. I felt like I was living a double life, the dutiful wife on the outside and the amateur detective on the inside. Every moment Michael was out of the house, I was searching for more clues, more evidence of his betrayal. I started by following him one day after he left for work. I called in sick again, feeling guilty about neglecting my students, but knowing I couldn't focus on teaching right now. I waited until Michael's car was out of sight, then jumped in mine and followed at a distance. To my surprise, he actually went to his office. I waited outside for hours, feeling ridiculous and paranoid. Just as I was about to give up, I saw him leave the building with a woman I didn't recognize. They walked close together, laughing and talking animatedly. My heart sank as I watched them enter a nearby cafe. I wanted to burst in there to confront them both, but fear held me back. Instead, I sat in my car, watching the cafe entrance like a hawk. They emerged an hour later, and I felt sick as I saw Michael give her a quick kiss before they parted ways. When he came home that evening, he acted like nothing was wrong. He even brought me flowers, claiming he'd just felt like it. The roses felt like a slap in the face. Did he buy her flowers too? How was work? I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Oh, you know, the usual, he replied, not meeting my eyes. How are you feeling? Better? I nodded, not trusting myself to speak. How could he stand there and lie to my face? The man I thought I knew would never do this. But then again, maybe I never really knew him at all. The next day, I decided to take a different approach. While Michael was in the shower, I quickly copied down the mystery woman's number from his burner phone. Then, gathering all my courage, I called it from a payphone during my lunch break. A woman answered, "Hello?" I froze, unprepared for the reality of hearing her voice. What should I say? "Hello?" she repeated. "Is anyone there?" I panicked and hung up, my heart racing. Her voice sounded young, confident. Was she prettier than me? Smarter? What did she have that I didn't? That evening, I tried a new tactic. I suggested we go out for dinner, just the two of us. To my surprise, Michael agreed readily. As we sat in our favorite restaurant, I studied his face, looking for signs of guilt or deception, but he seemed relaxed, even happy. "This is nice," he said, reaching across the table to take my hand. "We should do this more often." I nodded, fighting back tears. How could he sit here, holding my hand when he'd been with her just yesterday? The weight of his lies was suffocating me. "Michael," I started, my voice shaking slightly. "Is everything okay? With us, I mean?" He looked surprised. "Of course it is. Why do you ask?" I took a deep breath. "You've just seemed distant lately, like something's on your mind." For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of guilt in his eyes, but it was gone so quickly. I might have imagined it. "It's just work stress," he said, squeezing my hand. "Nothing for you to worry about." I wanted to scream, to tell him I knew he was lying, but the words stuck in my throat. I wasn't ready for that confrontation. Not yet. The next day, I took a sick day again and decided to stake out the cafe where I'd seen them before. I felt ridiculous, sitting there hour after hour, nursing the same cold coffee. But my patience paid off. Around lunchtime, I saw them again. They sat at a table near the window, too engrossed in each other to notice me watching from across the street. I saw Michael laugh at something she said, his eyes crinkling in that way I used to love. I saw him reach across the table and take her hand, just like he'd held mine the night before. I felt sick. I felt angry. I felt lost. This man, this cheater, this liar, he wasn't my Michael. My Michael would never do this to me. But the evidence was right in front of my eyes, undeniable and heartbreaking. As I watched them leave the cafe, walking close together, I made a decision. I couldn't confront him yet. I needed more proof, something concrete that he couldn't deny or explain away. I needed to catch him in the act. That night, as we got ready for bed, Michael's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then quickly put it face down on the nightstand. "Everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual. "Yeah, just work," he muttered, not meeting my eyes. I nodded, pretending to believe him, but inside I was seething. More lies, always more lies. As Michael slept beside me, I lay awake, my mind racing. Tomorrow, I decided. Tomorrow, I would end this charade once and for all. I would follow him again, but this time, I wouldn't just watch from afar. This time, I would confront them both. The thought terrified me, but I knew it was necessary. I couldn't live like this anymore, constantly doubting, constantly hurting. Whatever happened tomorrow, at least I would know the truth. And then, well, I'd figure that out when the time came. As I finally drifted off to sleep, one thought kept echoing in my mind. Tomorrow, everything changes. I woke up the next morning with a pit in my stomach. Today was the day. The day I'd finally confront Michael and her. I couldn't even bring myself to think the word mistress. It made everything too real. As usual, Michael left for work with a quick kiss on my cheek. "Have a good day, honey," he said, like everything was normal. Like he wasn't about to destroy our entire life together. I waited 30 minutes after he left and then got in my car. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely turn the key in the ignition. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my nerves. I could do this. I had to do this. She walked into Michael's building with purpose, like she belonged there. My breath caught in my throat. This was it. I waited another excruciating 15 minutes, then got out of my car. My legs felt like jelly as I crossed the street and entered the building. The security guard barely glanced at me as I walked to the elevator. As the elevator climbed to Michael's floor, I tried to prepare myself for what I might see, but nothing could have prepared me for the reality. I stepped out of the elevator and there they were, right in the middle of the hallway. Michael had his arms around her, their foreheads touching as they spoke in low voices. They were so wrapped up in each other they didn't even notice me at first. "Michael." My voice came out as a strangled whisper. They jumped apart like they'd been burned. Michael's face went pale as he saw me standing there. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" I laughed, a harsh, bitter sound that didn't sound like me at all. "What am I doing here? What are you doing, Michael?" The woman, Rebecca, I remembered from the emails, looked between us, her eyes wide. "Michael, who is this?" "This," I said, my voice shaking with anger, "is his wife." Rebecca's face drained of color. "Wife? You're married?" Michael looked like he was going to be sick. "Sarah, I can explain." "Explain." I cut him off. "Explain what, Michael?" "Explain how you've been lying to me for months. Explain how you've been sneaking around behind my back. Explain how you could throw away 10 years of marriage for this." Rebecca took a step back. "I'm so sorry. I had no idea he was married. He told me he was divorced." I turned to her, my anger finding a new target. "And you believed him?" You never thought to check? To ask for proof? She shook her head, tears forming in her eyes. I'm so sorry, she repeated, before turning and fleeing down the hallway. Michael reached out to me. Sarah, please, let's talk about this. I jerked away from his touch. Talk about what, Michael? About how you've been lying to me. About how you've made me feel crazy for weeks. About how you've broken every promise you ever made to me. He looked desperate now. It's not what you think. I never meant for this to happen. I love you, Sarah. You have to believe me. Love me. I laughed again. That same bitter sound. If this is what your love looks like, I want no part of it. I turned to leave, but Michael grabbed my arm. Please, Sarah, don't go. Let me explain. For a moment, I was tempted. A part of me, the part that still loved him despite everything, wanted to hear him out, wanted to believe there was an explanation that could make this all okay. But then I remembered the receipts, the secret phone, the emails. I remembered all the lies, all the times he'd looked me in the eye and told me everything was fine. I pulled my arm from his grasp. There's nothing to explain, Michael. I've seen enough. I know enough. As I walked away, I heard him call after me. Sarah, please, I'm sorry. I'll do anything. I stepped into the elevator without looking back. As the doors closed, I caught one last glimpse of Michael, standing alone in the hallway, looking lost and broken. The ride down was a blur. I made it to my car before the tears started. They came in a flood, great heaving sobs that shook my entire body. I cried for the love I'd lost, for the trust that had been shattered, for the future I'd thought we'd have together. I don't know how long I sat there crying in my car. Eventually, the tears slowed, and a new feeling took their place. Anger, determination. I wasn't going to let this break me. I was stronger than that. As I started the car, I made a decision. This wasn't the end. It was a new beginning. Michael had made his choice, and now I was making mine. I was choosing me. I drove home, my mind racing with plans. I had no idea what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I deserved better than this. And I was going to make sure I got it. I didn't go home that night. I couldn't face the house we'd shared, the memories we'd built. Instead, I checked into a small hotel downtown. As I sat on the unfamiliar bed, I watched it ring out, then watched as text after text came through. Sarah, please come home. We need to talk about this. I'm so sorry. Please give me a chance to explain. I turned off my phone. I couldn't deal with him right now. I couldn't deal with anything. Sleep didn't come easily that night. I tossed and turned, my mind racing. What would I do now? Where would I go? How could I face my students, my colleagues, our friends? The questions piled up, each one more overwhelming than the last. When morning finally came, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. I turned my phone back on, bracing myself for more messages from Michael. But there was only one, sent in the early hours of the morning. I understand if you need space. I'll be staying with a friend. The house is yours. I'm so sorry, Sarah, for everything. I felt a lump form in my throat. Part of me wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to let him explain. But a stronger part knew that would be a mistake. I needed time to think, to process, to decide what I wanted. I checked out of the hotel and drove aimlessly for a while, eventually finding myself at the school where I taught. It was Saturday, so the parking lot was empty. I sat in my car, staring at the building where I'd spent so much of my time, where I'd built a life separate from Michael. That's when it hit me. I did have a life separate from Michael. I had my career, my students, my passion for teaching. He hadn't taken that away from me. He couldn't take that away from me. With a newfound sense of purpose, I drove home. Our home. My home now, I supposed. As I walked in, I half expected to see Michael there, waiting for me. But the house was empty, silent. I moved from room to room, seeing everything with new eyes. The photos of us on the walls, the mix of our belongings on every surface. It all felt like it belonged to someone else now. I sat down at the kitchen table. the same table where we'd shared countless meals, where we'd laughed and talked and planned our future. Now it felt cold, unwelcoming. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I knew I could count on. "Lisa, it's me. Can you come over? I need you." Lisa arrived within the hour, armed with ice cream and a bottle of wine. One look at my face and she knew. "Oh, honey," she said, pulling me into a hug. What happened? I told her everything. The suspicions, the investigation, the confrontation. By the time I finished, we were both in tears. "What are you going to do?" Lisa asked, passing me another tissue. I shook my head. "I don't know. I can't believe this is happening." Lisa took my hand. "Listen to me, Sarah. You are strong. You are smart. You are going to get through this." I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. But right now, I felt anything but strong. We spent the rest of the day talking, crying, and yes, drinking wine. Lisa helped me start to make a plan. First step, a lawyer. Second step, therapy. Third step, telling our families. As Lisa was leaving, she turned to me. "Remember, Sarah, you didn't do anything wrong. This is all on him." I nodded, but I couldn't help wondering, could I have done something differently? Could I have been a better wife? Could I have prevented this somehow? That night, as I lay in our bed, my bed now, I let myself really cry for the first time. I cried for the love I'd lost, for the future we'd planned, for the trust that had been shattered. I cried until I had no tears left. When I woke up the next morning, I felt different. Not better exactly, but stronger, more determined. I got up, showered, and stood in front of the mirror, really looking at myself for the first time in weeks. You can do this," I told my reflection. "You're going to be okay." I didn't fully believe it yet, but I was going to keep saying it until I did. I spent that day going through the house, gathering evidence, bank statements, credit card bills, emails I'd printed out. Anything that showed Michael's deception. It hurt, seeing it all laid out like that, but I knew it was necessary. As I was going through his desk, I found something that made my heart stop. A small velvet box, hidden in the back of a drawer. With shaking hands, I opened it. Inside was a beautiful necklace, the same one I'd seen on the receipt weeks ago, the one he'd bought for her. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. The reality of his betrayal hit me all over again. But then something shifted inside me. This necklace, this tangible proof of his infidelity, it didn't break me. It made me angry. And that anger, it made me strong. I closed the box and added it to my pile of evidence. Michael had made his choice. Now it was time for me to make mine. I wasn't going to let his betrayal define me. I wasn't going to let it destroy me. I was going to survive this. More than that, I was going to thrive. Michael had no idea what he'd unleashed. He thought he could break me. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. The day of the confrontation finally arrived. I'd spent the past week gathering every shred of evidence I could find. Bank statements, iPhone records, even screenshots of text messages I'd managed to recover from Michael's cloud backup. I was ready. I'd arranged to meet Michael at a cafe near our house. Well, my house now. I chose a public place because, honestly, I didn't trust myself to be alone with him. I arrived early, my hands shaking as I ordered a coffee I knew I wouldn't drink. When Michael walked in, my heart clenched. He looked terrible. Dark circles under his eyes, his usually neat hair a mess. For a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. Then I remembered why we were here, and that sympathy turned to steel. "Sarah," he said, sliding into the seat across from me. "Thank you for meeting me." I cut him off. "I'm not here to listen to your excuses, Michael. I'm here to talk about our divorce." He flinched at the word divorce, like he hadn't expected it. "Can't we at least talk about this?" "I made a mistake, Sarah. A horrible, unforgivable mistake. But I love you. We can work through this." I laughed, a bitter sound that made the couple at the next table glance over. "Work through this? Are you serious? You didn't forget to take out the trash, Michael. You had an affair. For months. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know what I did was awful, but it didn't mean anything. It was just what? I interrupted. Just sex? Just a bit of fun? Just you throwing away our entire marriage for someone else? He reached for my hand across the table, but I pulled back. Please, Sarah, I'll do anything. Go to counseling, quit my job, whatever you want. Just don't throw away what we have. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. What we had, Michael, past tense, because what we had was based on trust and respect and honesty, and you destroyed all of that. I can earn it back, he pleaded. Give me a chance. I shook my head. No, Michael, you had your chance. You had 10 years of chances, and you threw them all away. I reached into my bag and pulled out the folder of evidence I'd compiled. I know everything. Michael, the dinners, the hotels, the gifts. I know about the necklace. His face paled. How did you? It doesn't matter how I know, I said, cutting him off. What matters is that I do know. And I'm done. I slid the folder across the table to him. This is a copy of everything I've gathered. Bank statements, phone records, hotel receipts. My lawyer has the originals. Lawyer? He echoed, looking stunned. Yes, Michael. Lawyer. I've already filed for divorce. You'll be served with the papers tomorrow. He leafed through the folder, his face growing paler with each page. Sarah, please, we can work this out. I'll do anything. I stood up, gathering my things. It's too late for that, Michael. You made your choice. Now I'm making mine. As I turned to leave, he grabbed my arm. Sarah, wait. I love you. Doesn't that count for anything? I looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since he'd arrived. The man I'd loved for so long, the man I'd built my life around, and I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just a profound sense of disappointment. And if this is what your love looks like, I said quietly, then no, it doesn't count for anything. I pulled my arm from his grasp and walked out of the cafe, ignoring his calls behind me. As I stepped into the sunlight, I took a deep breath. It was done. I'd faced him, said my piece, and walked away. The rest of the day passed in a blur. I went home, changed into my most comfortable pajamas, and curled up on the couch with a pint of ice cream. I'd done it. I'd confronted Michael, stood my ground, and taken the first step towards my new life. As evening fell, my phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. How did it go? Are you okay? I thought about it for a moment. Was I okay? No, not really. I was hurt, angry, scared of the future, but I was also relieved. The weight of suspicion and doubt that had been crushing me for weeks was finally gone. I'm going to be, I texted back. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I replayed the confrontation in my mind. I'd been strong, stronger than I ever thought I could be. I hadn't let Michael's pleas sway me, hadn't fallen for his promises of change. For the first time in weeks, I felt a glimmer of hope. Yes, my marriage was over. Yes, the future I'd planned was gone. But I was still here, still standing, still fighting. As I drifted off to sleep, I made a promise to myself. This wasn't going to break me. I was going to come out of this stronger, a better, happier. Michael had underestimated me, had thought he could deceive me and get away with it. He was about to learn just how wrong he was. The days after the confrontation with Michael were a blur of emotions. One moment I'd feel strong and empowered, ready to take on the world. The next, I'd be curled up in bed, sobbing into my pillow, wondering how my life had fallen apart so spectacularly. I took a leave of absence from work. The thought of facing my students, of pretending everything was normal, was just too much to handle. My principal was understanding, thankfully. Take all the time you need, she'd said. We'll be here when you're ready to come back. Lisa became my lifeline during those dark days. She'd come over with groceries, force me to eat, and listened patiently as I cycled through anger, grief, and fear. "You're allowed to feel all of this," she'd tell me. "It's part of the healing process." One particularly bad day, about a week after the confrontation, I found myself staring at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. I barely recognized the woman looking back at me. My eyes were puffy from crying, my hair a tangled mess. I looked broken. That's when something inside me snapped. I was tired of feeling like a victim, tired of letting Michael's actions define me. I grabbed a pair of scissors and, without thinking, started cutting my hair. Chunks of it fell into the sink as I hacked away, tears streaming down my face. When I was done, I looked like a different person. My once long hair now barely reached my chin, uneven and choppy. But for the first time in weeks, I felt a spark of something other than pain. It wasn't quite happiness, but it was close. It was possibility. I called Lisa, my voice shaky but determined. "I need your help," I said. "Chucks, I'm ready to start moving forward." Lisa arrived an hour later, armed with hair dye and a professional pair of scissors. "Let's fix this mess," she said with a grin, gesturing to my impromptu haircut. As she worked on my hair, we talked, really talked. Not just about Michael and the divorce, but about me. What I wanted, who I wanted to be. "I feel like I've lost myself," I admitted. "Like I don't know who I am without him." Lisa met my eyes in the mirror. "And then this is your chance to find out. To become the Sarah you want to be, not the Sarah you think you should be." Her words struck a chord. For so long, I'd defined myself as Michael's wife. But now I could be anyone, do anything. The thought was terrifying and exhilarating. "You're right," I said, a small smile forming on my lips. "It's time for a change." Over the next few weeks, I threw myself into reinvention. I joined a gym, started taking yoga classes, even signed up for a painting course at the local community college. Anything to keep my mind occupied and to rediscover parts of myself I'd forgotten. It wasn't easy. There were still days when the grief would hit me like a tidal wave, leaving me gasping for air. Days when I'd find another reminder of Michael hidden in a drawer or closet, and I'd be right back at square one. But slowly, surely, I started to heal. I found strength in unexpected places, in the kindness of friends who rallied around me, in the words of encouragement from my students, parents, who'd heard about the divorce and reached out with support, in the simple act of getting up each morning and facing the day. One morning, about a month after the confrontation, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Michael the day before. Not once. It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. I decided to celebrate by treating myself to breakfast at my favorite cafe. As I sat there, sipping my latte and people watching, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. My new haircut, now professionally styled, framed a face that looked different, stronger, more confident. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a genuine smile spread across my face. I wasn't okay yet, not by a long shot, but I was getting there, one day at a time, one small victory at a time. I was rebuilding myself. As I finished my breakfast, my phone buzzed with a text from my lawyer. "Good news," it read. "Michael's agreed to our terms. The divorce should be finalized within the month." I stared at the message, a mix of emotions swirling inside me. Relief, sadness, fear, hope. But mostly, I felt ready. Ready to close this chapter of my life and start writing a new one. I walked out of the cafe with my head held high, feeling the warmth of the sun on my face. The future was still uncertain, still scary, but for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see what it held. As I drove home, I made a detour to the school. It was time to go back to work, to reclaim that part of my life. Time to show my students that even when life knocks you down, you can get back up. I walked into the principal's office, my heart pounding but my resolve firm. "I'm ready to come back. I said. She smiled, warmth and understanding in her eyes. Welcome back, Sarah. We've missed you. As I left her office, I passed by my classroom. Through the window, I could see my students, heads bent over their work. They looked up as I passed, their faces lighting up with smiles and waves. In that moment, I felt a surge of strength. These kids, my passion for teaching, my friends, my newfound sense of self, these were the building blocks of my new life. Michael had taken so much from me, but he couldn't take this. I walked out of the school that day with a plan to not just survive this ordeal, but to thrive, to become a stronger, better version of myself. Michael thought he'd broken me, but he was wrong. He'd only made me stronger. The day my divorce was finalized felt surreal. I stood outside the courthouse, the papers clutched in my hand, feeling a mix of relief, sadness, and something else I couldn't quite name. Freedom, maybe? Lisa was by my side as she had been through this whole ordeal. "How do you feel?" she asked, squeezing my arm. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp autumn air fill my lungs. Honestly, I'm not sure. It's like the end of a chapter, I guess, but also the beginning of a new one. "Well," Lisa said with a grin, "I say we celebrate. Dinner's on me tonight." As we walked to her car, I caught sight of Michael leaving the courthouse. Our eyes met for a brief moment. He looked defeated. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, but mostly, I just felt pity. He'd thrown away something good, something real, for a fleeting affair. I turned away, focusing on the future ahead of me. The future I was building for myself. That night, over dinner with Lisa and a few other close friends, I found myself laughing for the first time in what felt like ages. Real, genuine laughter that bubbled up from somewhere deep inside me. It felt good. It felt like healing. "To new beginnings," Lisa toasted, raising her glass. "To new beginnings," we all echoed. The next few months were a whirlwind of change and growth. I threw myself into my work, pouring all my energy into my students. I started volunteering at a local women's shelter, helping other women who were going through similar situations. It felt good to give back, to use my experience to help others. I also decided to go back to school. I'd always dreamed of getting my master's degree, but somehow it had always taken a back seat to other things, to Michael's career, to our plans for a family. But now it was my time. The day I received my acceptance letter to the Master's in Education program, I cried. But for the first time in a long time, they were tears of joy. Life wasn't perfect, of course. There were still days when the pain of Michael's betrayal hit me out of nowhere. Days when I'd find an old photo or stumble across a reminder of our life together, and it would feel like a punch to the gut. But those days became fewer and farther between. And each time, I found myself bouncing back a little quicker, a little stronger. One day, about 6 months after the divorce was finalized, I ran into Rebecca at the grocery store. My heart skipped a beat when I saw her, a flood of emotions washing over me. Anger, hurt, but also curiosity. She saw me too, and for a moment we just stood there, frozen in the produce aisle. Then, to my surprise, she approached me. "Sarah," she said, her voice trembling slightly. I'm so sorry for everything." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. "Thank you," I said, surprised to find I meant it. "I appreciate that." We talked for a few minutes, awkwardly at first, then with growing ease. She told me that she'd ended things with Michael as soon as she found out he was married, that she'd had no idea, that he'd told her he was divorced. As I listened to her, I felt the last bit of anger I'd been holding on to start to dissipate. It didn't excuse what had happened, but it helped me understand. "I hope you find happiness, Rebecca," I said as we parted ways, and I was surprised to realize I meant that too. That night, as I sat on my couch grading papers, I found myself reflecting on how far I'd come. The woman I was a year ago wouldn't recognize me now. I was stronger, more independent, more sure of myself. My phone buzzed with a text from Lisa. "Hey, Remember that guy from my office I told you about, the one who's also recently divorced? He's asked if I'd set you two up. No pressure, but I think you'd really hit it off. What do you say?" I stared at the message, my heart racing. Dating again? The thought was terrifying, but also exciting. I was ready. Ready to open my heart again. Ready to trust again. "Sure," I texted back. "Why not?" As I hit send, I felt a smile spread across my face. This was it. The start of my new chapter. The start of the rest of my life. I walked to the window, looking out at the city lights twinkling in the distance. I thought about everything I'd been through, everything I'd overcome. Michael's betrayal had nearly broken me, but in the end, it had made me stronger. I'd lost a husband, yes, but I'd found myself. And that, I realized, was the greatest victory of all. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter, like a weight I didn't even know I'd been carrying had finally been lifted. I got ready for work with a spring in my step, excited for what the day might bring. As I walked into my classroom, I was greeted by the eager faces of my students. These kids, who had unknowingly been my anchor during the stormy seas of my divorce, looked at me with admiration and trust. "Good morning, class," I said, my voice strong and clear. "Today, we're going to talk about resilience, about how sometimes life knocks us down, but what matters most is how we get back up." As I began the lesson, I caught my reflection in the classroom window. The woman looking back at me was confident, strong, and ready for whatever life might throw her way next. I smiled to myself. Michael had underestimated me. He'd thought his betrayal would break me. Instead, it had transformed me, made me stronger, braver, more resilient than I'd ever been before. This was my story now, my life, my future, and I couldn't wait to see what came next.